I have always been practical in my family, while my older brother Bart, always driven by his ambitions, tirelessly pursued the dream of starting his own business, plunging into the world of deals, partnerships, and endless negotiations, while I, on the contrary, followed the proven path, building a career methodically, step by step, investing years of effort and work into it. Confident that stability and consistency will eventually lead to success. This approach finally paid off when I got a position at Crawford & Associates, a reputable law firm, when my new salary looked almost indecently large compared to my previous income, and it seemed like it was finally time to enjoy the fruits of my labor. But the only thing that marred this triumph was the place of work itself, which took an unbearably long time to get to, spending 2 hours each way. This meant that 4 hours every day were spent fruitlessly sitting in traffic jams, nervously switching radio stations and endless glances at the digital clock, desperately counting down the minutes that I could spend on something really useful. After 2 weeks of this debilitating nightmare, when I came home exhausted, with a headache from the city noise and smog, I realized that this could not go on, and decided to urgently find a place closer to the office, even if it meant spending the weekends searching and exploring all possible options. That Saturday, I went to my parents for a traditional family dinner, which always took place in the same rhythm. Mom was busy in the kitchen, surrounded by the aromas of freshly prepared food, and Dad, as usual, was sitting in his favorite armchair with a newspaper in his hands, from time to time looking up from reading to insert some remark about politics or economics, as he has been doing for many years, ever since I can remember. It seemed that everything around me was frozen in time. The same smell of apple pie with cinnamon permeating the house, the same cozy kitchen curtains with embroidered flowers, the same warmth of the family hearth in which I found solace and stability. "How are you doing at your new job?" Mom asked, putting a steaming casserole on the table, which exuded such an alluring aroma that I felt my stomach cramp from hunger. "Actually, it's very good," I replied with a smile, although I didn't really feel that enthusiastic. But why spoil the evening with complaints? The only problem is the road. I spend too much time traveling back and forth, so I started looking for a place closer to the office. As soon as I said these words, I noticed that my parents exchanged glances, and this look was painfully familiar to me. It was the way they looked at each other when they were preparing to tell me something important or offered a solution that they believed would change my life for the better. Mom wiped her hands on her apron and sat down next to me, saying softly, "You know, Amber, we might have a great solution for you. Do you remember Helen's grandmother's old apartment?" I froze, trying to figure out where she was going. "The one I inherited," Mom continued, pulling the plate toward her. "Our tenants moved out last week, and now it's empty. And it's only a 5-minute walk from your office." I almost dropped the fork I was holding in my hand. Of course, I remembered this apartment. I spent a lot of weekends there as a child, when Helen's grandmother was still alive. It was a cozy one-bedroom apartment in a quiet neighborhood, with huge windows letting in a lot of light, and a small balcony where Grandma grew her favorite flowers, delicate purple petunias that exuded a subtle sweet fragrance. An image of childhood surfaced in my memory. I'm sitting on an old wicker chair, swinging my legs, and Grandma puts a cup of tea with lemon in front of me and tells me her endless stories about her youth, how she and Grandpa met in this very house, how they fell in love, quarreled, reconciled. "How much will the rent cost?" I asked carefully, trying to hide my sudden excitement, although my heart already told me that it would be madness to refuse this offer. Mom named the amount, and I couldn't help but raise my eyebrows. It was significantly lower than the market value of rent in the area. "We'll give you a family discount, of course," she added with a smile. I didn't even try to bargain. The conditions were too good, and the prospect of forgetting about long, tedious trips looked like a real salvation. "I'm taking her," I blurted out, unable to contain my joy. And at that moment I felt something inside me relax as if I had finally found a way out of this chaos. "It's settled," Mom nodded with satisfaction, and Dad finally looked up from the newspaper and folded it in half, looking at me over the top of his glasses. "And now have you heard about your brother's latest success?" With these words, he turned the conversation to his favorite topic, Bart's achievements. I looked down at my plate, slowly shifting the food with my fork, while my parents vied with each other to admire his success, telling me how he had just attracted 3 new corporate clients to his courier company, how his business was booming, and how he was moving to new heights. It has always been so. Bart was always the golden child, the one who wasn't afraid to dream big, take risks and plunge into new adventures, the one whose victories were discussed at the family table with undisguised admiration, while I was just Amber, the one who followed a safe path, built a career without sudden movements and revolutionary ideas, who did not seek to conquer the world, but preferred to organize it methodically, step by step, brick by brick. But that day, when I entered Grandmother Helen's apartment with the first box in my hands, even my practical nature was not ready for what appeared before my eyes. The apartment looked as if the previous tenants had not just treated it without special care, but deliberately tested its strength. The wallpaper, which had probably once been pastel, now hung in dismal shreds, peeling off at the corners like the tattered pages of an old book. The ceiling was decorated with suspicious dark spots, the origin of which I preferred not to find out. The only piece of furniture was an ancient sofa, which looked like it had survived more than one era. The upholstery was faded, the springs creaked treacherously at the slightest movement, and the armrests looked as if generations of cats had been sharpening their claws on them for years. I carefully sat down on this sofa, crossed my legs, and, pulling out my phone, dialed my mom's number. "Hey, Mom, can I do some repairs?" There was a mumble on the other end of the line, typical of those moments when Mom was watching her cooking shows. "Oh, of course, dear," she replied absently. "Just don't make everything too bright. You know how I feel about all these trendy neon colors that are everywhere now." I couldn't help but smile. "Mom, have you ever seen me wear something brighter than navy blue?" "Well, yes," she admitted. "And what are you up to?" "I think about calm, earthy shades, maybe something in soft beige and gray tones, with dark blue accents." Mom grunted with satisfaction, clearly encouraged that I wasn't going to turn the apartment into a circus tent. That same evening, I immersed myself into the internet, opening endless interior design websites, flipping through Pinterest pages and gathering inspiration for the future transformation of my new home. I created a whole mood board where I thought through every detail to the smallest detail: warm gray walls, soft beige sofa cushions, a noble dark blue plaid, light curtains letting in light, wooden shelves with books and atmospheric light. Everything was supposed to be restrained but elegant, cozy but collected, in general, the same as me. The next few months turned into a whirlwind of work and repairs. I'd come home from the office, change into my old clothes, and get down to business. First, I took off the wallpaper, and it turned out to be a much more tedious task than I imagined, because the wallpaper seemed to have decided to resist to the last. Then it was the turn of painting, which taught me an important life lesson: one more layer is rarely just another layer, but rather turns into 3 or even 4. Buying furniture became my new hobby. I spent hours shopping, choosing the perfect sofa, checking it for comfort, imagining how I would spend my evenings on it reading or watching movies. I chose a massive solid wood dining table so that it could accommodate 6 guests, even if I couldn't imagine who those 6 people were right now. And then there was that fluffy rug that connected the whole space together, making it truly mine. Months of weekends and evenings were spent on this transformation, but finally everything was done. I was standing in the center of my finished apartment, examining the result of the work done, and suddenly I felt a lump rise in my throat, not from fatigue, not from overexertion, but from pride, so deep and warm that for a moment I wanted to cry. I did it. I turned this rundown apartment into a cozy home, and it was an incredible feeling. When my mother came to see the finished result, I felt like I was inviting a strict critic to the premiere of a long-awaited play. She walked through the rooms, slowly running her hand over the new kitchen countertops, studying the soft lamp in the corner, the subtle pattern on the wallpaper in the bedroom. "Amber." She finally turned to me, and there was genuine surprise in her voice. That's great. I almost stumbled in surprise. Mom never gave compliments for nothing, especially when it came to me. Actually, I'm impressed, she added, looking around the living room. Did you do all this yourself? I nodded, trying not to smile. I'll do it myself. Mom ran her hand over the smooth surface of the table again, as if checking if it was really real, and suddenly said in a completely different tone, in which there was something thoughtful, almost nostalgic. You know, your Grandma Helen would be proud of you. And at that moment, I realized that, perhaps for the first time in a long time, I feel like not just Amber, but someone more. I nodded, trying not to look too pleased with myself, although inside I was filled with a sense of pride for the work I had done, for being able to turn a dull, neglected apartment into a cozy, stylish, and truly my space. But instead of bragging, I just shrugged and casually said, "Well, Lessons YouTube was very helpful." That's great, Mom said, and there was more than just casual approval in her voice, as if she really saw something new in me, not just an office worker, but a person who could create something with his own hands, change the surrounding reality. And then something happened that hadn't happened in years. She hugged me, not with the quick and formal hugs she usually limited to at family gatherings, but with real, warm and firm hugs, such that I held my breath for a moment, afraid to move so as not to scare off this rare moment of intimacy. 2 weeks later, I went to another family dinner, literally jumping up and down with excitement, because I had news that I couldn't wait to share. I was promoted at work. Now I became a senior account manager, with a good salary increase, with my own team, with new opportunities, and I was so proud of this achievement that I spent the whole day mentally rehearsing how I would tell my parents about it, imagining how they would smile, how Dad would say that something like, "Well done, Amber," and Mom might even pat my hand in recognition. "Mom, Dad," I said, seizing the moment when there was a pause in the conversation at the table. "I have good news. I was promoted at work." I looked at my mom, waiting for her reaction, but she barely looked up from her plate, nodded and said absently, "That's sweet, honey." And then, as if my words were just a short-term distraction, she turned to Dad and lowered her voice. "Did you hear anything from Bart today?" And that's when the real conversation began over dinner. It turned out that my brother's courier company was in serious trouble. A major national competitor came to town, whose business was built wisely, with user-friendly order tracking apps, lower prices, and an aggressive advertising campaign that lured Bart's customers one by one. His business was getting worse, incomes were falling, drivers were quitting, orders were declining, and the family suddenly felt like this was a disaster requiring immediate intervention. "We'll help him," Dad said firmly, pushing the plate aside as if it were a done deal. "We decided to take out a loan," Mom added, looking at him with support, as if this was the only right and obvious step. I almost choked on the water. "Wait, what?" I set the glass down on the table and swallowed hard against the lump in my throat. "Look at it this way," Dad said, as if trying to explain something simple and self-evident. "Maybe it's even an opportunity. If Bart can't compete with this big company, maybe it's time to try something else. Start over. Maybe it would be better than throwing good money at bad ones." But before I could respond, a tense silence fell between them. They exchanged glances, but not the way they did when they were deciding how best to help me with the apartment, but the way they look at the person who disappointed them. "You don't know anything about business, Amber," Dad finally said, his voice taking on a harshness I hadn't heard before. "You've always played for sure with your office work. Your brother is an entrepreneur. He's taking a risk. Family always helps family," Mom added with unwavering conviction. "That's what we do." I opened my mouth to protest, to say that help is one thing, but recklessness is quite another, that a loan is not just money, but obligations that will weigh on them for many years to come, that sometimes the best way to help is to let a person face the consequences of their decisions themselves. But then I shut my mouth. What's the point? They have already made a decision. I could have told them that I had found a cure for cancer, and they would still have been more concerned about delivering Bart's vans. The next 6 months were like watching a car crash in slow motion. Mom called me from time to time, informing me about the situation, although I never asked. The loan was taken out, new vans were bought, prices were reduced, but it was not enough. The competitor continued to grow, luring the last remaining customers. Its marketing promises of next-day delivery looked too tempting, and its technical solutions were too convenient to compete with. And then the bell that I've been waiting for all this time rang. "Your brother's company went bankrupt," Mom said, and there was a strange combination of fatigue, tension, and anxiety in her voice. "He and Sarah moved in with us, temporarily, just until they get back on their feet." I gripped my phone tighter, remembering that family dinner when 6 months ago it was all so obvious that it didn't even require productions. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said after a pause, because what else could I say? "I told you so." "They're sleeping in your old room," Mom added, as if this was just another detail in a series of events, but I knew there was more to it than that. "Sarah takes it pretty hard. You know how she feels about appearance." Oh, yes, I knew. Sarah always looked down on me, constantly emphasizing that she was married to the CEO, as if that put her head and shoulders above everyone else. She never missed an opportunity to make a remark about my boring office work, that I play by the rules, that I lack ambition. I wonder how she's coping with life among ordinary mortals now. I went to my parents' house that weekend, telling myself that this was just another family dinner, that I wasn't going to take any more conversations about Bart's problems to heart, that I shouldn't expect anything new because everything would be the same as always. But as soon as I crossed the threshold, I felt that something had changed. There was tension in the air, thick and tangible, like an electric charge before a thunderstorm, pressing on my chest, clinging to my breath, making it a little heavier than usual, and forcing me to slow down, looking around, as if I had unwittingly invaded someone else's territory. Bart was sprawled out on the couch in the living room, holding his phone in his hands, mindlessly scrolling through the news or messages. His pose spoke of complete indifference to what was happening, and when I entered, he didn't even bother to get up or at least say hello clearly, just let out a short sob that could mean anything from a casual, "Hey," before, "Oh, you're here too." Sarah was sitting in an armchair, looking as if it were a throne, and she herself was a queen who found herself in exile and had to endure inconveniences in the House of Commoners. Her designer handbag, perfectly matched to her immaculately pressed outfit, rested at her feet, and her expression suggested that her patience was hanging on the last thread. When our eyes met, she gave me one of her trademark looks, the one that mixed fatigue, annoyance, and slight contempt, as if I were something that had accidentally stuck to her shoes. My mom's voice came from the kitchen, calling us to dinner, and with a sigh, I followed her, reminding myself that I could just eat and leave without getting involved in another conversation that would surely boil down to discussing Bart and his failures. But, of course, I should have known better. Hoping for a quiet family dinner was stupid. I had barely picked up my fork when Bart began what was clearly a prepared speech, because the words came out of him without hesitation, with carefully practiced intonation, as if he had already told this story in front of a mirror more than once. "I had everything under control," he insisted, brandishing the knife as if it were not a silverware but a pointer highlighting important points. "The business was growing, we were expanding, everything was going great, and then these corporate vultures came with their fancy technologies and deep pockets." Sarah, lazily pushing food around her plate, interjected her line without even looking up. "They probably spent millions on marketing." "Exactly," Bart exclaimed, slamming his palm on the table so that the glasses clinked. "They're just bullies with big budgets. And don't make me start talking about those idiots at the bank who didn't extend our credit line. Complete dumbasses who are unable to distinguish a good business opportunity, even if it bites them right on the maybe." I began, choosing my words carefully, because I knew my thought would be met with hostility. "Maybe it just works that way. Business is business, and competition is a part of it. You should have planned for such risks when you started the company." In the silence that followed, one could hear the hand of the clock on the wall moving forward one notch. Everyone stared at me as if I'd just offered to eat rocks for breakfast. Bart put down his fork and grinned, but there was nothing funny in that grin. "That's easy for you to say, with your warm office job," he said, looking at me as if I had no idea what real difficulties were. "What do you know about running a business?" I opened my mouth to protest, but then Dad, who had been listening to the conversation in silence, gave me a brief look that read a silent warning. I pressed my lips together and concentrated on my plate, carefully arranging the peas around the edges. And then Sarah leaned back and sighed dramatically. "I can't live here anymore," she suddenly announced, her voice filled with displeasure, which she didn't even try to hide her annoyance with. "No offense," she added, clearly not feeling any regret, "but I need my own personal space." Bart instantly perked up, as if he'd been pulled by a string. "Hey, Mom, what about Grandma Helen's old apartment? She still belongs to you, right?" I lifted my head so abruptly that my neck cracked. "I live there," I said quickly, hoping that would be enough to close the subject, but somehow knowing that everything was just beginning. "And I completely repaired it." "Oh, yes," Mom suddenly perked up, nodding with pride. "Amber has done a wonderful job with this place, now it looks just fine." I saw Bart and Sarah exchange a quick glance, and something cold settled in my stomach. That look wasn't just disappointment that the apartment was occupied, or just annoyance that they couldn't solve their problem instantly. No. It was the look of people who figure out options, look for loopholes, and plan. But I pushed the feeling away. I was being paranoid. They wouldn't, would they? On Wednesday evening, I returned home, looking forward to warming up the leftovers of last night's dinner, sitting on my favorite couch and finally starting to watch the series that I had been putting off for weeks, enjoying the silence, comfort, and the realization that, despite all the family troubles, this place belongs to me. This is my home, my corner. A place of peace where I can be myself. But as soon as I got to my floor, that feeling of calm crumbled to dust, because I could hear voices right outside my apartment door. Familiar, too familiar, and for a second I even thought I'd misheard, that I'd imagined it, but no, Bart was laughing, Mom was saying something, with a slight hint of irritation in her voice, and Sarah was just commenting on something in the condescending tone she usually used when she was examining something that was obviously below her standards. I froze, listening, my heart pounding faster, but instead of standing there like a fool, I pushed open the door and walked in, seeing exactly the picture I was afraid of: Mom, Bart, and Sarah standing in my living room, as if they had always belonged there, as if they had the right to do so, as if it was like they were the owners, and I was just a guest who accidentally walked into the wrong apartment. Sarah slowly ran her hand over the new curtains that I hung just a month ago. Her fingers lightly glided over the fabric, assessing the texture, and then she tilted her head to one side, as if considering whether to change them to something more stylish. I forced myself to take a deep breath, keeping my voice steady even though everything was already boiling inside me. "Mom?" I tried to speak calmly, but my voice still sounded strained. "What's going on? Why are you here? You could at least call before you just come in." Mom waved her hand dismissively, not even looking at me. Her attention was completely focused on how Sarah continued her rounds, carefully examining my apartment, like a real estate agent conducting an assessment before selling. "Don't be ridiculous, Amber," Mom said in the tone of someone explaining to a child that he's asking stupid questions. "This is my apartment. I don't need permission to visit her." My mouth went dry. Something in her tone. Alarm bells rang in my head, but I tried not to panic, instead watching as Sarah walked with feline grace to the kitchen, ran her fingers over the new counter that I had installed with my own hands, looked into the freshly painted bathroom, nodded approvingly when she saw the built-in bookshelves in the living room, as if noting everything to herself the advantages of this place. And finally, she settled down on the sofa, an old one that had been left over from the days when the apartment was in poor condition, but for some reason I decided to keep it after the renovation and smiled. Her creamy, flawless smile seemed strained but satisfied. "It's perfect," she said, leaning back as if everything had already been decided. "We can move in next week." For a moment, it seemed to me that the world was tilted at a strange angle, that I just misheard, that this was a joke, a bad, stupid, but still a joke. "I'm sorry, what?" My voice sounded sharper than I intended. "You can't move here. I live here. This is my home." Mom finally turned to me, her lips curling into that patient expression I hated so much, the expression of someone who knows in advance that they've won an argument. "I decide who lives here," she said calmly. I blinked, as if trying to figure out if she had really just said those words, and then I swept my hand around the living room, the walls that I had painted myself, the floors that I had completely redone, the furniture that I had carefully chosen, adapting each element to my life, my taste, my sense of comfort. But I've put so much effort into this apartment." I heard my voice tremble, but I couldn't control it. "I completely repaired it." Mom's smile widened a little, but now there was something calculating and cold in it. "Actually, since you've improved the apartment so much, its market value has increased significantly." I clenched my hands into fists. And if you want to stay," she continued in the same even, almost benevolent tone, "then the new rent will be 3 times what you're paying now." The blood drained from my face. Everything finally fell into place. They planned it. Mom knew I couldn't afford the triple rent. My promotion was good, but not that good. "You're trying to kick me out," I could barely hear my own voice. Mom shrugged, not even trying to deny it. "If you can't afford the new rent," she said, as if she were explaining something for granted, "you should probably start looking for another place. You have a week to move out." They didn't wait for my reply. We just turned around and headed for the door, as if everything had already been decided, as if my words meant nothing. Sarah was already on the phone, presumably making plans to move, and Bart, who had been silent all this time, didn't say a single word, but he didn't need to. His silence spoke louder than any words. Mom stopped in the doorway, but didn't turn around. "A week," she repeated, and then the door slammed shut behind them. I stayed standing in the middle of my living room, the very living room that I had painted, decorated, made cozy, and turned into a house. But now the walls that had seemed so warm to me recently suddenly began to press, shrink, and loom over me, and the feeling of pride that I felt when I showed my mom my renovation was somewhat months ago. It turned to ash in my mouth. My family probably expected me to spend the evening crying into my pillow. I was already on the phone, looking through rental ads, and by midnight I had found the perfect option, a modern studio apartment just 2 blocks from my office, small but bright, with spacious windows and freshly renovated, with clean walls that had not yet known other people's hands, with a kitchen that was waiting for its first smells of coffee and freshly baked bread. The rent was higher than I paid my mom, but I didn't care, because for the first time in many years, I was paying for my freedom, for the opportunity to live without regard for someone's will, without fear that someone would one day decide that my walls no longer belonged to me. The first thing on Thursday morning, I took sick leave, not feeling a drop of guilt for missing work for the first time in 3 years, and by 9 in the morning I was sick so much that by 10 I was standing in a new apartment, signing a lease and making a deposit. The landlord, a serious-looking woman named Janet, raised an eyebrow when I asked if I could move in immediately, but when she saw how determined I was holding my pen over the papers, she just shrugged and nodded, giving the go-ahead. The next stop was a moving company. I found one that specialized in same-day transfers, and without hesitation agreed to pay for the urgency. While the movers were packing, I returned to my mother's apartment and armed myself with a pack of stickers, methodically marking everything I bought with my money. The movers arrived at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and I stood in the living room like a conductor, directing their movements. "The gray sectional sofa is mine," The dining table and 6 chairs are mine. All kitchen appliances, except the stove and refrigerator, are mine. These bookshelves, which I installed myself, looking at the instructions, are also mine. Detail by detail, item by item, I was reclaiming what belonged to me. The coffee maker that I finally decided on after my promotion. A memory mattress that I snagged at a discount on Black Friday. The TV, which was delivered by mail, and I myself mounted on the wall after watching 3 different lessons on YouTube. Everything I'd bought to make this place a home was now neatly stacked in boxes and then disappeared into the truck. When they finished, the apartment looked almost the same as the day I first entered it. Empty walls, bare floors, gray light from a single light bulb, the impersonality of the space that I once filled with warmth and life. The only thing left is the old sofa, the one that Mom let me keep when I moved in. Now he was standing in the middle of the living room, like a captain going down with his ship. I looked around for the last time, remembering all the weekends I spent painting these walls, all the evening hours I spent choosing furniture, fabrics, paintings, creating a space that became my home, and tried to feel regret, but it wasn't there. I went to the door, locked it one last time, and then took out the envelope in which I put the keys, and put it under my parents' front door on the way to the new apartment. All night I was arranging my new home, moving furniture, arranging books, hanging clothes, moving objects over and over again, until everything finally seemed right to me, until I felt that this place was beginning to find its soul. But the real storm started the next morning. The phone vibrated at 7 in the morning. Mom first. Then Bart. Then Sarah. Then Mom again. Then Bart again. I watched as the screen lit up with their names over and over again, as the phone buzzed on my new kitchen counter, reminding me that there was something inevitable behind it. She calmly took a sip of coffee, enjoying its warm, bitter taste, and when the calls didn't stop, she finally picked up the phone. "How dare you?" Mom's voice exploded from the speaker, filling the room with rage and indignation, as if she'd been slapped in the face. "The apartment is completely empty. Your brother and Sarah have nowhere to sleep except this old couch." I took another leisurely sip of coffee, letting the silence drag on a bit. "Actually, I had every right to do that," I said calmly. "I bought all this furniture with my own money, and I have the receipts if you want to see them. I left everything that was in the apartment originally. You let me use that couch, remember?" There was a deathly silence on the phone. I imagined my mother standing in an empty apartment, her gaze darting across the bare walls, the floor, and the lonely sofa, as Bart and Sarah stood side by side, silent and clenching their teeth, as all their carefully thought-out plans crumbled right in front of their eyes. And then Mom said something that would have made Grandma Helen's cheekbones cramp, and she probably would have sent her to wash her mouth with soap. The call ended with a short, angry click. My phone vibrated again 30 minutes after my mom called, but this time it wasn't new calls, but a stream of messages. Notifications poured in one after another, filling the screen with pop-ups until I turned off the sound. Bart and Sarah apparently decided that their best strategy now was to blow up my messaging app and make me feel guilty for, in their opinion, ruining their lives. The first message from Sarah was laconic and angry. "You're a vengeful witch." I raised an eyebrow, but continued reading. "How dare you take everything? You're just jealous, because Bart is a real entrepreneur, and you're just a red tape." Bart's messages were no better. "You're being selfish. You've always been jealous of my success. Now you're trying to punish us just because we're going through a difficult period. Very cool, little sister. Very cool." The messages continued to pour in, each new one being even more sarcastic than the previous one. According to my dear brother and his wife, I was greedy, heartless, vindictive, petty, cruel, selfish, and my personal favorite characteristic is a soulless corporate drone who wouldn't recognize family loyalty even if it bit her in the face. I read each message once, then closed the app without responding. It was a waste of energy to participate in their drama, to justify myself, to prove something to people who had decided in advance that I was to blame. Instead, I plunged headlong into arranging my new place, arranging furniture over and over again, decorating the walls, hanging shelves, carefully selecting every detail, until the space around me finally became what I could easily breathe in, what I wanted it to be, mine. A month has passed without any contact with the family. I would gladly say that I don't think about them at all, that I have completely left them in the past, but that would be a lie. From time to time, I found myself wondering how they were doing, if they were able to buy at least the simplest furniture, or if they were still sleeping on that old sofa that they were once allowed to leave me, if my mother was still cooking her famous lasagna for Sunday dinners, if she was talking with the same warmth about Bart as before, or there's that subtle note of weariness in her voice now that she always sounded when the conversation was about me. But every time these thoughts came up, I pushed them away. They made their choice. And then, exactly 1 month after my move, my phone lit up with a familiar number. Mom. I stared at the screen, hesitating, unsure whether I should answer at all, because I intuitively knew that this call was not an apology, not an attempt to establish a relationship, not the sincere impulse of a mother who realized how much she had offended me. But some strange mixture of curiosity and pent-up hope made me swipe my finger across the screen and pick up the phone. The payment didn't arrive, she said without any preface, her voice strained, irritated, accusing. I blinked, not even understanding what he was talking about for a second. And then she laughed. Of course, he didn't come. I grinned at the way my own voice sounded calm and confident. I don't live there anymore. Remember? You kicked me out. That's not the point, Mom cut me off abruptly, her annoyance now sounding louder. We expected you to continue making payments. My laughter instantly stuck in my throat. What? We're having a very difficult time right now, Amber. Mom's tone changed to a sympathetic, plaintive one, but there was still a note of demand in it. We're still paying off the loan we took out for Bart's business, and you can't afford to pay the rent right now. The family needs your help. I gripped the phone tighter, feeling something cold and furious begin to boil inside. Let's get this straight, I said slowly, barely controlling my voice. You kicked me out of the apartment so that Bart and Sarah could move in there. And now you want me to keep paying for the rent of a place I no longer live in, just so they can live there for free? Family helps family, Mom repeated, as if that explained everything. I closed my eyes, inhaling through my nose, forcing myself not to scream. You know, I opened my eyes, and my voice was unexpectedly even, almost calm. We've already talked about this. The family helps the family. Exactly, Mom instantly seized on these words, but I didn't let her finish. And do you know who I am too? Family. Or at least it should have been. The silence on the other end of the line stretched out, but I wasn't going to break it. You're being dramatic, Mom finally said, but there was uncertainty in her voice now. I chuckled. No, Mom, I'm just finally seeing things the way they are. A click. She passed out. There was a long silence on the other end of the line, so thick and saturated with disappointment that I could almost feel it physically, and when Mom finally spoke, her voice was as cold as ice, without a trace of the previous irritation or anger, just a firm, dry condemnation. I'm very disappointed in you, Amber. I suddenly laughed, sincerely and loudly, because this phrase was so absurd, so ridiculous in the context of everything that had happened, that the only possible reaction was laughter. That's funny, I said, still smiling. I was just about to tell you the same thing. Then, without giving her a chance to say anything else, I ended the call, and a second later I blocked her number. Next was the father's number, then Bart's, then Sarah's. I opened all the messaging apps and blocked them there too, because I knew they wouldn't stop, that there would be more attempts to put pressure on me, make me feel guilty, pity me, or blame me again, but I wasn't going to participate in this endless game where I was always the loser. To make sure that I wouldn't hear anything more from them, I checked all my social media accounts and blocked them there as well. It was like cutting off a limb, painful, strange, and leaving behind a phantom void, because despite everything, it was still my family, and it wasn't as easy as I would have liked to give them up completely. But somehow, for the first time in a long time, I was finally able to breathe. Weeks passed, then months. I didn't seek meetings or conversations, but information still filtered through the family vine, mostly through my cousin Rachel, who was always decent to me, never took sides, but also did not interfere in what did not concern her. She told me fragments, snippets of news, mixed with her own comments and opinions, which she rarely expressed aloud. According to her, Bart apparently came up with another genius business idea involving the delivery of something like handmade pet food, or maybe it was organic food subscription boxes. Rachel wasn't sure, but her tone made it clear that she doesn't really believe in the success of this venture. As it turned out, my parents went around asking various relatives for money for startup capital for his new venture, but most of them had already had enough sad experience with Bart and his ambitions to firmly refuse now. Even Uncle Derek offered to help, Rachel told me over a cup of coffee one Saturday. I raised an eyebrow. Uncle Derek was notorious for his loans, with interest rates that would make even Wall Street sharks blush. If he offered money, then my parents were really desperate. So what? Did they take it? I asked, not quite sure what I wanted to hear in response. No, even they're not that desperate, Rachel chuckled. But the last I heard, they're seriously considering taking out another loan to finance this new Bart project. She was watching my reaction carefully, as if trying to figure out how her words would make me feel. 6 months ago, I would have been terribly worried. 3 months ago, I would have been angry. And now? I slowly stirred my latte, watching the foam turn into little curls. Not my circus, not my monkeys, I said, and was surprised to find that I really meant it. Rachel snorted, shaking her head, but there was approval in her gaze. You seem different, she said. Happier. I thought about it. About my new apartment, furnished exactly the way I wanted, without compromise, without regard for other people's tastes and opinions. About my recent promotion at work, which I celebrated with my colleagues, and not with my family, as I used to do, because now it was they who supported me. It was with them that I could share my joy, without fear that my success would be belittled or ignored. About the cooking classes I signed up for on weekends because I always wanted to learn how to cook as well as my mom, but I never found the time while I was renovating the apartment that never really became mine. Yes, I replied after a pause, feeling my lips stretch into a smile of their own accord. I'm really happy. Later that evening, I was sitting on my couch, in my apartment, with a glass of wine in my hand, looking out the window at the lights of the city, thinking about everything that had happened, about how everything had changed in the last 6 months, how I had changed. My mother's words echoed in my head for the last time, family helps family. They were right about one thing, the family really should help the family. But somewhere along the way, they forgot that help should be two-way, that love should be unconditional, that family is more than blind devotion, that a real family supports each other in growth, and does not condone failures. I took another sip of wine and smiled. I had better things to do than try to fix people who don't want to be fixed. Much better things, actually.